even in Vilnius, the way they treated him, the way they isolated him. He's a man who has outlived his usefulness. He was, somebody who was handpicked to be brought in. I mean, if you take a look at his TV show Servant of the People, take a look who funded it, the timing of it in relation to the building him up as a presidential candidate to replace Poroshenko. You see the hidden hand of Western intelligence there, primarily MI6, but the CIA as well. And we know this. I mean, again, Scott, there's a lot of speculation taking place there, isn't there? Well, I don't know. What was one of the most famous sayings that Zelensky had early on this conflict? The first poster that came out. I know it's on the tip of my tongue. I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. Do you remember that? I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. Because somebody had dared say, why doesn't the CIA get him out so he can go live in his mansion in Miami? I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. All over headlines. I mean, and that was the beginning of the Zelensky war guy, tough guy. Now he's wearing all his.
He's out there. He's in the fatigues. He comes to Congress in the fatigues. People are saying get a damn suit, but he's in his armored fatigues. Yeah.
I mean, I tried to tell him, Zelensky, green only counts when you have the Eagle Globe and Anchor on it, pal. Otherwise, you're just a fake, and he is a fraud. But the point is, they built him up. But then the truth came out. Somebody asked, hey, we've been looking all over for when was this speech made? When did he make this statement? Do you have it on recording? Is there something here? And finally, a statement came out of the U.S. Embassy. Well, Zelensky actually didn't say that. That was a statement made by a CIA official attached to the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. Oh, so the CIA is scripting everything. Yes, now you've broken the code. Zelensky is literally an actor. He's an actor playing a part. There's no original thought in that poor little man's mind. He's reading script after script after script. And you know what happens? I mean, everybody's seen it when you watch a good TV series. The first season's outstanding. Then they go into the second season, you're going, what the hell happened to the writing?
Especially these days in the era of streaming. Especially with all of these programs, it's like one season good, and then the rest.
You're like, who's doing the writing? Well, the problem is you couldn't sustain. This wasn't like Servant of the People. I think got 5 seasons out of it. They're having trouble. They had a good first season. Zelensky had a good first season. He really did. Hell, he won an Oscar. I mean, just ask Sean Penn. He won an Oscar. I mean, so yeah. But
Sean Penn wants to melt the rest of his for ammunition. Ukraine certainly needs it. But
the second season, it's not going well. The poor writing and everything. So, you know what happens when the season starts to fall? You got to kill off some people. You got to bring in new blood, and I think Zelensky is going to be killed off. Literally, maybe, but at a minimum, he's just going to disappear, and they're going to bring in somebody else because this is all grotesque theater of the absurd. Every aspect, from the Canadian Parliament, which was a scripted event up until, again, the whole thing about bad writing is you don't realize it's bad writing until you actually air the episode and all the critics go, what the hell was that? And suddenly everybody just wakes up and goes, wow, that was really bad writing. Well, why didn't you review that in the lead up to everything about this script is bad from the count? Why? Again, to show you that why it's this PR running this. No military professional would broadcast the counteroffensive the way the Ukrainians did. They literally scripted exactly what they're doing. Literally scripted, and the Russians went, thank you very much. And they built this defensive line, and now everybody's surprised. The Russians have built a very extensive defense. You told them where you're going to attack, man. They
just read The Economist. That's all they had to do. Read The Economist, read the Wall Street Journal.
And you told them when you're going to attack, and you told them with what kind of forces you're going to attack. Not only that, you told them what tactics you're going to use. General Miley, I think in May, goes to Germany, and he's there, and it was hilarious because you read the article. Undisclosed military training base in an undisclosed NATO country because we have to protect the operational security. Miley, well, we're out here doing combined arms training. We're taking U.S. doctrine and we're bringing it together in a training package so that the Ukrainians can use combined arms training in their attack. They're going to revamp their tactics to use NATO tactics, and the Russians are going, rewind that. Thank you very much, guys. Pull out NATO tactics, combined arms training. Okay, let's revamp our defenses. They literally told the Ukrainians everything. They might as well have handed the operational plan to the Russians and said, this is what's going to happen. That's why they got their butts kicked. This is poorly written theater, horribly written. They're trying to score points by they released all this because they have to convince you and me and the rest of the Western audience that there's really going to be a counteroffensive, because people were starting to say, why are we sending all that money there? What's the purpose of this again? I mean, there was that whole battle of Bakhmut. Everybody's forgotten about that. The meat grinder, 70,000 dead Ukrainians, grinding them up. Why are they doing it? People are starting to get a little, no. Hey, our ratings are going down, screenwriter. What do we got to do? Let's reintroduce, episode 10, the counteroffensive. The general approaches the desk. He looks at the reporter with a very stern look, and he says, we're going to launch a counteroffensive. And then you have to write and tell everybody what the counter, because this is theater. You don't fight a war this way, but that's exactly what's happening. Everything the West does is spin. It's spin. It's tragic spin, because there's a lot of people dying, mostly Ukrainian, but it's not war. It's not military art. And frankly speaking, everybody in NATO involved in this, everybody in the U.S. military should be relieved for incompetence. If the U.S. Army threw American lives away this callously, they would be hauled before Congress, and they'd probably get some sort of for criminal negligence. Yeah, it would be the end of their.
And the American public themselves would be a scandal. I mean, the number of casualties in Iraq, Afghanistan, these places paled in comparison to what's happening
in World War II. In the Battle of Tarawa, the Marines had a very bad day. Their amphibious vessels they had a mistake about the tides, and they thought they were going to be able to take their amphibious craft right into the shore, and instead they got stuck on reefs about a mile out, and the Marines had to wade in chest high water, a mile of water, getting machine gunned down by the Japanese. There's no cover. You just got to keep walking, and you're either going to live or you're going to die. You don't get a choice. The Japanese machine gunner gets to decide that. The photographs of the bodies bobbing in the water, piled up on the sand, were prohibited to be published to the American people at the time. And indeed, the Marines were told, you can't have another battle like this, or else Congress is just going to say, what the hell's going on? Because already Congress is asking the question, why did you lose so many guys for this tiny little island? How did you go about losing this many people? Nobody wanted to talk about it. But, and that's just a couple thousand Marines. Imagine going to Congress and saying, because Congress is going, hey, we gave you all that money. You guys built up four armies. Where are they? Well, 8 to 9 out of every 10 guys that we train are dead or wounded now. That's again, I'm not making that up. The military commissar of Poltava gave a statement. He said, out of every 100 guys that have been mobilized in Poltava, 80 to 90 of them are either dead or wounded. That's 80 to 90% casualty rate. Remember earlier I said 50 to 69% make combat ineffective. 80 to 90 means you ain't around anymore. You got nothing. So they're just, if this went up to the U.S. Congress, in World War II, they had on the European theater, the 36th Division, I think, was a Texas National Guard division. And they were getting ready to launch an attack across a river, the Rapino River or something in Italy. And the bombers came in. They were supposed to hit the Nazis on the other side. They greased their bombs early, and they blew the little snot out of the 36th Division, killed a whole bunch of Texans. All the Texan congressmen were screaming for blood, as they should be, incompetence like that. Now imagine having an American general hauled before Congress, and they said, what happened? Well, we got beat. Why? The Russians were better trained, better equipped than us. What do you mean? What do you mean better trained? How long does it normally take to train a soldier to do a combat breaching operation? Well, sir, by the time we do basic training, advanced training, about 2.5 years. And how long did you train the soldiers for this combat breaching operation? About 2.5 months. So you took soldiers, gave them 2.5 months training for a 2.5 year project, and you threw them into battle. Yes, sir, that's about it. But they were competent, right? I mean, at least they had good fundamental skills. Oh, no, sir, only 3 weeks of training. Well, how long does it take to train a Marine, a basic training? 13 weeks, sir. And Ukrainians, you gave them 3 weeks. Oh, yes, sir. And then you put them into equipment. Now, they were familiar with the Leopard tank, right? Oh, no, sir, they've never dealt with a Leopard tank before. How long does it take to train a Leopard tank operator? Well, sir, it takes about a year and a half to get a good Leopard crew up to speed. And how much time did you give the Ukrainians? Sir, we gave them 3 to 5 weeks. Do you see where I'm going with this, Danny? Mm-hmm. If this was an American explaining the deaths of American soldiers to U.S. Congress this way, they'd all be arrested, as they should be, criminally negligent. But now, because these are just Ukrainians, we don't care about you. This is the thing that everybody has to understand. What I just told you proves we don't care about Ukraine. We don't. If we did, we would never let this happen. We are simply using Ukraine as a vehicle to bring pain to Russia. That's it. We're willing, as Lindsey Graham said, to fight to the last Ukrainian. And that is sickening. You know, we talked about that 90-year-old Nazi and what he did during the war. You do understand that Americans are guilty of a crime that is larger than the crime that he and his Nazi colleagues committed. They killed, 100,000 Poles, 200,000 Russians, 40,000 Jews. We've killed 400,000 Ukrainian soldiers. We did it, not the Russians. Don't blame the Russians. We're the ones that led them to undertake the most complicated military operation imaginable, the breach of a heavily defended position. And we said, do this, and we didn't train them right. We didn't equip them right. We didn't prepare them. They were totally unprepared for this. And we said, go forward. And then we have the audacity halfway through it, after they've lost 71,000 guys. You heard people say, well, those Ukrainians are just casualty averse. What? You can say what you want about the Ukrainians, and I'm very critical of again, especially the leadership that has embraced Nazi ideology, etc. But the Ukrainian soldiers, even the ones with minimal training, big brass balls to do what they're doing. I challenge anybody in your audience right now, just if you get into a vehicle and drive to certain death. And if you make it, get out of the vehicle and keep advancing. These Ukrainians are courageous. And be the Russians. Imagine the Russian getting the snot pounded out by artillery, holding your position, not withdrawing, so that you can lay waste to the Ukrainians coming in. Both sides are staffed with some of the bravest soldiers imaginable. I think I told you the story, but I'll just tell it one more time, about the Battle of Bakhmut, where the Wagner troops surrounded about 20 Ukrainian soldiers in a basement. They said, surrender, brothers, surrender. We'll treat you well. We'll feed you. You'll go home, all that stuff. And what did the Ukrainians say? Russians don't surrender. And they fought to the death. They didn't say Ukrainians don't surrender. They said Russians don't surrender. Why? Because they're trained in the history and lore of the Soviet Union, of the Red Army, etc. And that's something that came out of World War I and World War II, where Russian soldiers were surrounded by the Germans and told to surrender. And they said Russians don't surrender, and they fought to the death. This war is about Slavs fighting Slavs, brothers fighting brothers, cousins fighting cousins. This is the saddest kind of war imaginable. In America, we talk about the American Civil War. This is that kind of fight taking place right now. And the tragedy is, the Russians do they genuinely care about the Ukrainians. You just see video after video of Russian soldiers going in, taking care of the wounded, evacuating. There's a new sick video out where the Russians actually came in and picked up the Ukrainians that were abandoned by their own side. They treat them, give them first aid, and they start to evacuate them. There's a Ukrainian drone overhead watching this. And as the Russians start to evacuate, the Ukrainian drone calls in Ukrainian artillery fire to kill the Russians who were rescuing wounded Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are, their leadership scum. The Russians actually treat the Ukrainians with respect. They capture them, they feed them, they give them first aid. There's a whole video of, and I know a lot of this is propaganda, but it's still sincere. they invite the families to come in and visit the prisoners of war. So the girlfriends, the wives, the mothers all get to come and visit their sons, their husbands, their relatives in prison. I mean, this is tragic. The Russians care more about the Ukrainians than we do.
Yeah, and I think what's even more sick about this too is, as we were talking about earlier, that there's a script being written for Zelensky and for Ukraine's so-called leadership, and it almost feels like now, as we were talking about, the seasons, or this current season is just poorly written. It almost feels like at this very moment there really isn't much of a script left, and you have Zelensky kind of lashing out at the mouth, and there's a lot of, it seems like there's a lot more tension here, and at the same time that there's this tension between basically his masters and himself, there's also this change in the narrative, which to me is even more heinous, and underscores a lot of what you're saying here in terms of the difference between how the Ukraine's government, how NATO, how the United States are treating Ukrainians as compared to Russia. Now they're talking about a long war of attrition. This, mind you, for months and months and months, all of the people who have pay attention to this stuff with a not maybe a non-neocon mentality have been talking about Russia fighting a war of attrition. Now the collective West is saying, oh no, this is a war of attrition and we need to fight this till the end. And you have Alexei Arestovich talking about 2035. I mean, will there be any Ukraine left if that's the case? This is the leadership. This is basically all the leaders of this project now talking in this manner of, yeah, we'll just permanently do this to Ukraine. It'll just happen on and on and on and on, and we won't change our tune. We'll just continue to throw them out there until we can't any longer.
Look, the it takes two to tango. I mean, first of all, I always find it funny that the West talks about a frozen thing, a negotiated ceasefire, etc. But isn't it Zelensky that had his parliament pass a law that prohibits any talk of negotiation? And the Russians keep saying, you guys want us to negotiate, but I mean, you might want to talk to Zelensky to get the parliament to repeal the law that says he can't negotiate. But the Russians have made it clear, and again, they throw the words back of the West. Early on, Stoltenberg and others were saying that because the Russians don't want to negotiate, this is a war that will be decided on the battlefield. On the battlefield. Okay, well, and now they're going negotiating, and the Russians are going, no, I like that other thing you were saying. It's decided on the battlefield because that's where it's going to be decided. There will be no negotiation. First of all, who are they going to negotiate with? They tried it with the Ukrainians, the same ones that are there right now. They lied. Remember, Zelensky actually negotiated a treaty that was ready, a ceasefire agreement that could have brought an end to this war. The Germans and the French lied to the Russians about the Minsk Accords. There's a sham just to buy time to build up the Ukrainian army. Why are they going to believe them again? America's lied about everything we've ever done with Russia. Who are the Russians going to trust on this one? There's no one to trust. And if you can't trust, then you can't have negotiations. Plus, the Russians have made it clear that they have objectives that they're non-negotiable. And the Ukrainians have put forward just such unrealistic positions. I mean, the Russians had to withdraw to 1991 borders. Isn't going to happen. The Russians have to turn over their government to the International Criminal Court to be tried as war criminals. That ain't going to happen. The Russians have to pay reparations. That's not going to happen. It's stupid. It's if I could sit down and write demands to my town council and go to the town council meeting. I need you to dissolve the police department and give me all that money so I can build a golf course in my backyard. Well, that's not going to happen, Scott. Well, we're not going to have a settlement here until that happens. That's one of my conditions. Well, Scott, that's totally unrealistic. But nobody's telling Zelensky. Well, actually, everybody told Zelensky. Remember, there was that peace summit they had in Saudi Arabia where like 30 nations came together, and Zelensky went, send his guys down there, and they're like, here's our 10-point peace plan, total surrender by the Russians. And everybody else went, that ain't going to happen. You're so far off base. The Russians right now are in unconditional surrender mode. I mean, listen to Lavrov, listen to Putin, listen to everybody that speaks on this. There will be no negotiation. Ukraine will have to, agree to very specific things. But the sooner Ukraine agrees to it, the sooner this war can end, and the more territory Ukraine will have. Ukraine will never get Kherson back, never get Zaporizhia back, never get Lugansk back, never get Donetsk back. They will definitely never get Crimea back. But right now they can hold on to everything else. But if they continue this conflict and it goes on, if the Russians do push forward and start forcing the Ukrainians into this precipitous retreat, the Russians could very well end up having Kharkov, Sumy, Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, probably swing over, take Odessa, drive up to Transnistria, which means that entire Black Sea coast will be denied to the Ukrainians going forward. And once the Russians take it, at this juncture, I don't think they'd be giving it back. Again, not a Russian, they get to make their own minds, but the Russians have made it clear that when Russian blood gets spilled on soil, it becomes Russian soil. And if the Ukrainians want to continue this fight and compel Russia to expend lives to take historically Russian cities like Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov, Sumy, majority population, Russian populations, they're never going to give them back. Again, I hearken people to listen to Vladimir Putin's speeches, 2005 presentation, I believe, given in April. The one where he said that one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union, and everybody jumped in and went, see, that old Putin, he just wants to bring the Soviet Union back. But they didn't listen to the rest of the speech where he said, because overnight tens of millions of Russians became homeless. I am the president of the Russian nation. The Russian nation isn't defined by the borders of the Russian Federation. It's defined by the location of the Russian people, people who have common culture, heritage, religion, language. And the people of Eastern Ukraine are, in the minds of Putin, part of the Russian nation. That doesn't mean that he wants to take them. Remember, in March, Russia was willing to give back these territories to Ukraine, but he just wants that the Ukrainian government treats the Russian population with respect, allows them to speak their language, and worship the way they want to, etc. The Ukrainians are the one who committed, basically ethnic and cultural genocide against the Russians. So the Russians aren't going to yield on any of this. And once they take Russian territory, territory that's populated by a majority Russian population, I don't see a situation where they give it back. Not at this stage of the game.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.